thank you so much for being here with us today and joining us for the 10th edition of the Lahore Literary Festival. My name is Eman Omar, and I'm one of the organizers here at the LLF. I'm delighted to be here and to be in conversation with none other than Rachel Yoder, who has joined us here today from Iowa in the United States. Rachel, thank you so much for being here today.
Iman, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure and honor.
It's my absolute pleasure to talk to you and to discuss your novel. And before we really delve into your comical, wry, dark, and sometimes even sultry debut novel, Nightbitch, I'd like to formally introduce you. Rachel is most famously known for her debut novel, Nightbitch, released in July 2021, which became a bestseller overnight. Nightbitch has also been optioned for film with Amy Adams set to star, and it was one of the most anticipated novels of 2021. Rachel is a graduate of the Iowa Nonfiction Writing Program and also holds an MFA from the University of Arizona. Her writing has been awarded the Editor's Prize in Fiction by the Missouri Review, and with notable distinctions in Best American Short Stories and Best American Non-Required Reading. She is also the founding editor of Draft, the Journal of Process. So that's your introduction. Rachel, would you like to read a little passage from your book?
Yeah, I would be happy to. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I'm just going to read from the very beginning of this juicy, meaty Nightbitch.
Can we see the
Yeah,
cover first for a little bit?
certainly.
Oh, so that's a piece of raw meat, and the title is very provocative, as is the cover. So,
Yeah, and this actually came from a vintage meat ad from the 1950s that was telling housewives to buy meat. There was some big campaign in the United States then. So,
fascinating.
yeah. Alrighty, here we go. We'll just launch in at the beginning. When she had referred to herself as Nightbitch, she meant it as a good-natured, self-deprecating joke, because that's the sort of lady she was, a good sport, able to poke fun at herself, definitely not uptight, not wound really tight, not so freakishly tight that she couldn't see the humor in a light-hearted, not meant as an insult situation. But in the days following this new naming, she found the patch of coarse black hair sprouting from the base of her neck and was like, what the fuck? I think I'm turning into a dog, she said to her husband when he arrived home after a week away for work. He laughed, and she didn't. She had hoped he wouldn't laugh. She had hoped that week, as she lay in bed wondering if she was turning into a dog, that when she said those words to her husband, he would tip his head to one side and ask for clarification. She had hoped he would take her concerns seriously. But as soon as she said the words, she saw this was impossible. Seriously, she insisted, I have this weird hair on my neck. She lifted her normal hair to show him the black patch. He rubbed it with his fingers and said, yeah, you're definitely a dog. I'll stop there.
Right. So, in essence, this book is about a new mother who thinks she's morphing into a dog, right?
It is. Yeah, I think she doesn't know what's happening at first, but then comes to believe that, yeah, she's turning into a dog at certain moments.
Right. So, you also mentioned that you're a mother. So, is this morphing into a dog or thinking that there's something going on with them? Did this happen to you? Is it a personal story? Does it come from a very personal place?
I would say I never thought I was morphing into a dog. That was
Okay.
never a fear of mine in
Thank you for
early
that
motherhood.
clarification.
So that would be pretty amazing if it were. No, though the book is also very personal in other ways, that I think the story of a woman who finds herself a new mother and finds herself completely lost in new motherhood. She loses sort of like the essence of who she was before she became a mother and is really struggling to come up with a sort of new self or new identity that incorporates like both motherhood and her own ambitions and dreams. She doesn't know, how to occupy that space yet. And that was a very personal sort of, that was the personal story that I was working out through the sort of absurd, fantastical premise of Nightbitch.
Right, so I think it's important to add that the 21st century is a place where everyone is free to write about, any provocative topic, right? And you wrote about motherhood, and motherhood traditionally and in traditional literature is romanticized in the place of a mother's, just as a nurturer, and it's just a holy sort of role, and it's remained sacrosanct. So, what do you have to say about that? Did you think you received any criticism about it? Did you think, I mean, from your elders or anyone? Because it does have a lot of shock value for people, who don't might not share that sort of sense of humor, quote unquote.
Sure. I mean, I was worried, especially about my elders. And you should also know that I come out of a very conservative religious tradition. I was raised Mennonite, which is very, similar to the Amish, if you're familiar with them. And so, my parents are quite devout, and I grew up in a religious community. So I was, pretty worried because motherhood is very sacred, as you said. Um, but I have been really heartened to have, had talked not just with my mom, but with other, um, women readers who are in their 60s and 70s, and said this brought motherhood, early motherhood, all back. And I completely understand this. And I think certainly some of them were a little, like the title is provocative and there's like swearing in the first sentence. And certainly that can turn some people off. But I think if they're able to kind of like get past that, they do see that it's telling a story that they can really relate with. And that was really fulfilling to hear that from my elders, especially from my women elders.
Right. So in the beginning, you mentioned a little bit about identity and, the loss of identity, or, finding yourself again after giving birth, and, you know, after a certain episode in your life. And um, you also metaphorically write about it by not giving your any of your characters names except for Jen. What does that have to do with having an unnamed protagonist who slowly starts being referred to as Nightbitch, and as well as an unnamed husband.
Yeah, I think, the my British publisher called this a book of ideas or a novel of ideas. And I think, it was very idea driven. Um, and because of that, I wasn't so much interested in sort of this is going to sound strange, but like the particulars of these characters. I was more interested in the ways they were functioning as sort of tropes or as sort of archetypes of mother and father and child. um, and so that's why they remained unnamed. It seemed like I was working sort of, if not in a sort of mythic space, in a space that was adjacent to myth. um, and so for that reason, I wanted to kind of see these archetypes moving around through the story as opposed to making them incredibly particular. um, so that was sort of the thinking behind not naming them. um, it's almost like the reader can sort of project whatever they want to onto them.
Right. So you kind of talk about archetypes and the role of mother and sometimes even father. So in this case, in Night Bitch, the mother is a stay-at-home mom who's an artist, and of course, her bread and butter is her artwork and her paintings and her installations. But she's not doing that. She hasn't been doing that since she had this baby. this since 2 years, I believe, right? And there's this dad who's never at home. He's always working. He's away on business trips and all. But I'd sort of like to juxtapose the role of women today and the role of women in history, as role of mothers rather in history, and how times have changed, and not working sort of leaves a vacuum in your life and makes you feel unfulfilled, and so you desire to fill that vacuum with something or the other, like an identity. So what do you think about that? Did you experience that at a personal level at all? Did you stop working or anything?
I did actually, and it was very much unplanned. Um, I always thought that I would work when I had a child, but as you said before, there's, motherhood, there is something really sacred and alluring and wonderful. And after I had my son, I wanted to fully go into motherhood. It's beautiful, right? Like there's nothing better than holding your baby and nursing your baby and being with your baby. And so I very much was called to that in early motherhood. And it was actually agonizing to go to work, um, because I just had this very real, like bodily animal urge to be with my offspring. And so, very surprisingly, I wound up quitting my job. There was an economic reason in there, like daycare is so expensive. We don't have like socialized childcare in the United States. Um, so yeah, I did wind up being at home, and I stopped writing for 2 years. And I was just a mom at home, and my husband was gone every week for work. And I got to a point where I was almost 40, and I was a stay-at-home mom, and I had dropped out of the workforce. And I thought, what have I done? Where am I? Where did I go? Where did I go? Like I woke up out of my sort of like baby dream, and I had a, like whiny toddler, and I was like, what happened? And that's when I started writing Nightbitch, because I had lost myself, and I needed to get back to, like writing brought me back, to like my ambition, my creativity, to that thing that sort of made me me. And I found it was just so essential to be in touch with that part of myself in motherhood.
Right, that sounds wonderful. And do you think, like, I'm going to come back to your novel now. There's this phantom of a character, Wanda White, who's this sort of guiding light night in night in Night Bitch's life, right? So, did you have something like that? So would you like to explain who Wanda White is, and then talk about your personal experience?
Sure. So within the book, Wanda White is called a mythical ethnographer. She's presented as the author of a book that Nightbitch finds at the library called A Field Guide for Magical Women. And Wanda has spent her entire life and career traveling the world, chronicling all of the women, the magical women she's come in contact with. And she serves as a sort of, Nightbitch never meets her. Nightbitch can never find her, but Nightbitch starts writing letters to her, kind of calling out to her. They're almost like prayer, I think she says at one point, like writing to Wanda White. And I think Wanda White is the elder that Nightbitch really yearned for and didn't have in her life, the sort of elder maternal voice of wisdom who had answers and who could provide comfort to her. I know I did not have a Wanda White in my life. And I think, she showed up in the book. And I think it came out of, my own yearning to have that sort of force in my life, to have someone who was knowledgeable, who had some sort of knowledge that I didn't have access to because of her like experience and wisdom and age. And so that's how she works for Nightbitch in the book. She serves that role.
And I'm glad that it's a female character because even in reviews, Nightbitch is touted as a feminist fable or sort of like yeah, so a piece of feminist, you know, feminist work of art. And in the beginning, even I read that there's this white hot light in a woman that we have to restrain and tend to. And I don't think Nightbitch is doing that. I think, you know, after she has this baby, that white hot light she's not able to control, and she sort of finds freedom and emancipation in that. Is that what the case is?
I mean, I love that interpretation of the light and then how that relates to what happens to Nate Bitch. I mean, I think it also doesn't work, and I don't think it works for Night Bitch when the light burns so bright and burns so out of control, right? That there is a moment where she kind of goes over the edge with her sort of um on her quest for this selfhood. Like she doesn't quite know how to control it, or what this wildness how it could be useful, and it starts to turn destructive. um and I think that was very real for me too, this idea of like how your rage can actually eat you up inside if you don't figure out how to rein it in, how to use it productively. And so I think that's kind of what the fire is like.
Hmm.
Yeah, the fire can be a lot of things depending on how big it is, right? And how in control you are of it.
And I'd like to bring the husband back into this. And I feel as if he's kind of supportive, empathetic, and, you know, accepting of Night Bitch and what she's becoming. I think he's very gentle towards her. And so, what role does the husband play in Night Bitch's evolution into Night Bitch?
Well, I think his sort of cluelessness and absence are definitely part of what propel her into her Night Bitch era. I think it's that, it's not that he's a jerk or he's actively doing something to harm her. It's more of this benign neglect, right? That they have just fallen into these roles which have been given to them, have been handed to them. Oh, of course she'll be fine just being a stay-at-home mom. Of course I'm just going to go out and work, and what there's no problem. And so but she's like, no, there's more going on, and it's unspoken. It goes unsaid for a long time on her part. And so I mean, I guess his role, um he's not a very active character, but I think he is there to as a teacher for Night Bitch, right? Like he's the relationship is there so she can kind of learn a lesson about how to um make her marriage like work for her in a way that it isn't at the beginning of the book. um, how to like communicate with her husband instead of remaining silent inside a role that's not working for her.
Right. And, you know, towards the end, I mean, the denouement, I feel as if it's really a happy ending, isn't it? And I don't think happy endings really work for me, but in this case it was most satisfying, you know, just to see Night Bitch. I mean, I'm not going to spoil anything, but Night Bitch was creating a work of art, and and at her core she's an artist, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that draws parallels to you. And I think you really found yourself not as a Night Bitch, but maybe as an artist. And, you know, and how long did it take for you to write this book also? Like, I feel like you also had your happy ending, you know, in the end. You finally released a novel, and this is your first ever. So how long did it take for you to write this?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of parallels, aren't there? This took me probably 3 or 4 years to write, but I was very focused. I did it in bursts, in short bursts. So I would
Oh,
write
right.
for 2 weeks, 1,000 words every day, and then not write for a couple months and then go back. So, but I was just very determined to finish it. Um, yeah, I wanted to finally have a book after all these years. So I'm glad it worked out.
I'm glad it worked out for you too.
Thanks.
So, I think it's also very important that we bring in Nightbitch as a film and how it's been optioned with Amy Adams set to star. How do you feel about that? Isn't that amazing?
It's it is really amazing. I mean, it was such a surprise when it happened. It's not even something that was within the realm of possibility. Like I had never thought
Yeah.
of that. Um, yeah, and I think, I don't really hear a lot because I'm just the writer. I'm not involved in the film production, but I think it's still happening as far as I know. So it'll be exciting to see how someone else takes the story and interprets it in a different medium.
Right. I think it's wonderful, and we'll be really excited to see the film. And I think I saw an other interview of you where you said that you'd written a script for Nightbit just as a sort of just for your husband or something. Will they use that also?
I had done an adaptation, and then the director who came on is a writer director, so I think they are doing their own adaptation.
Okay.
So it'll be a different script, which I think is wonderful.
I think that's wonderful. Right. So now we're going to be taking questions. So please drop your questions, everyone. So they said they had questions, and let's just wait
Great.
a minute so that they sort of. So someone said that Shanze says, I love the reference to the yellow wallpaper. It's one of my favorite short stories. How would you compare your character to the development of psychosis in the yellow wallpaper?
Thank you for that question. I too love the yellow wallpaper. I read it in my feminist literature class in college 20 years ago, and it has been with me ever since then. Um, I think I included it or a reference to it because it's about a woman who's just had a baby who is going is having an experience and no one will listen to her, right? She's locked in a room. Her husband's a doctor and she just has no agency whatsoever. Um, and so it just felt like a sort of a precursor or an echo to what was going to happen in Night Bitch. And so I thought, yeah, it would just be nice to situate the book sort of within that same sort of legacy of writing, of like feminist writing about motherhood. And I imagined that Night Bitch had also, she had read the yellow wallpaper, so it would be something that would come to mind for her.
Right. Maha says, in what ways does your novel draw from feminist theory and tradition? Is there any feminist sociologist or anthropologist that you're inspired by, or someone? Um,
Oh, wow. I mean, I wish that, yeah, that would be wonderful. I mean, I guess I was more drawn to other pieces of feminist artwork did inspire this. Like one book that pretty directly I feel like gave me permission to write this book was her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado, which was a short story collection that came out in 2017 to much acclaim. And it was a short story collection that plays with fairy tale and urban legend and myth, and kind of rewrites fairy tales and urban legends and myths in very like feminist ways. And so when I saw that book was something that was really tapping into what was going on in the consciousness, tapping into readers, I was really excited by the possibilities. I was like, okay, maybe a book about a dog mom could work. Maybe people will read it. Um, yeah, so definitely, I think just other pieces of art have inspired me more than perhaps I'm not coming at it from the angle of like theory or of an academic, but more from an artist angle.
right. Um, So I also had another question for you, which I totally forgot to ask. I wanted to know a bit more about your creative process and what it was like to write about, the cat, and just just a warning: the Night Bitch is not for the faint-hearted. There is animal abuse involved and violence. So how did you feel writing about it? It was probably difficult, that rich experience of discomfort that you create.
Yeah, I mean that you have lit on the most uncomfortable moment of the book, and the moment I still feel the most uncertain about, and probably the moment I struggled the most to write and wrote and rewrote. Um, I still don't know if that moment is rendered correctly. Um, it's probably the moment people bring up the most, but I knew that it needed to happen. Like I knew she needed to have this sort of, she needed to go really close to the edge to a point that scared her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that she would have to sort of like reconsider this wildness and what it was, and how it how it could function in her life, without destroying her life, and destroying herself. So, I mean, I don't remember where I was when I wrote that, or what exactly was going on. But yeah, I still think about that moment, and probably would rewrite it again if I could, to try and get it right.
Right. Sanya asks, why did you choose the suburbs for your novel setting?
Well, I mean, I think there's something very domesticated about the suburbs, isn't there? That, everyone has their domesticated indoor and outdoor space. And so, then to also like play with this idea of like the family dog, right? That dogs have been domesticated, their wildness has been like brought inside. Um, but there's, like what happens then when like the wildness takes over.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, I mean, I guess, what if Night Bitch had been set in a city, it would
Mm-hmm.
be a
Fast
different
paced,
book.
right?
Yeah, it'd be very, and like the main character would be a different person if she were a city dweller. But I think as it stands now, I kind of wanted to look at sort of like the status quo, middle America, suburban, mother and woman, um and her, and look at her story and try and work through that.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for talking to me and for participating in the LLF, even if it's online. And we'd love to have you in Lahore at some point or the other. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Eman, thank you so much. This was wonderful, and your questions were wonderful. The conversation was wonderful, and it's just such an honor to be a part of the festival.